Thanks for being here, so it's pretty fast. So, did my wife agree to an open relationship without my knowledge? Today we have a story with a similar plot. Enjoy the show. When this happened, she didn't say, "Honey, we need to talk." I guess I should have seen this, but like most people, who are happy with their lives, I ignored the signs until they hit me. Was I too trusting? Maybe. My wife, Marcy, is 47 years old. And I am 48 years old. Our house has been empty for some time since our youngest son, Kyle, 18, went to college upstate. Our daughter Rhonda, 20, isn't the name. Much to my chagrin. I'm a retired Army colonel, adjusting to civilian life if that's even possible, for someone who spent almost 30 years in the Army. We are the Westons. We were at a party in the Goldsteins' backyard. Marcy tried to endure Chuck Marston talking in her ear. Chucky was probably trying to impress her with his muscles rather than his conversation. Marcy rolls her eyes, giving me the save me signal by scratching her nose. But I'm chatting frisky with Jenny, a single hot mom, whose husband left her with 2 kids and 40 extra pounds. Well, Jenny has lost some extra pounds at the gym, and is chatting in my ear about fitness or whatever. I smile at my wife, scratch my nose and smile. She gives me to stop talking to the big blonde and come save me. If you ever want to get laid again, look. Taking Jenny's hand, I lead her to my wife and muscular Chuck. Jenny lets me, but wonders why I brought her to my wife. Chuck, I say, extending my hand to shake. You know Jenny cheek. A little confused, but manages to pull himself together and reach out to Jenny. I take this opportunity to save my wife. My hero, she says, throwing a far from cheerful look at me. Although I saved her from the clutches of this scoundrel, it took you long enough. You know Jenny's tits aren't real, right? Considering how much I paid for yours, I think I know, I answer. Let's go home. Home? She says. I need to get to the airport early for my flight. On the way out of the gate, we pass a young Neil and couple. Vincent, Neil, and nods to make way for me while his wife Leslie smiles politely. We had previously done the obligatory every couple talk with them, so we just walk out, for some reason. Vinny and his wife's glances in my direction seemed strange to me. It was as if she was starving and looking at her next meal. Very strange indeed. Recent years spent in intelligence have made me a retired Army colonel, a little nervous and always wary. It's time to stop seeing conspirators in every incomprehensible glance, but I followed Marcy in hopes of night before the trip. We are no strangers to separation, especially since I spent years flying in wars and training missions. A year in Korea almost killed our marriage, and during one of our 2 meetings, we had a fight in Hawaii and almost got divorced. Years of military life take their toll on any marriage separations, stress, and distractions. Yes, you get the idea. All I know is that Marcy lost her temper when I returned, and we had a hard time getting back on track. But I knew something had happened this year, or someone. This is common in military marriages. The fact is that we have above average rates of divorce and infidelity. But after many years of service, I realize how lucky Marcy and I are to still be together, even knowing that she probably cheated while I was gone. How do I know? Because Marcy and the kids moved back to our hometown while I was gone. There, she got a job at a local hospital. It was near the hotel where my ex-girlfriend from high school worked as a manager, and she saw Marcy in the parking lot of the Red Roof Hotel across from the hospital. Lydia let me know when I was in Korea, but she had no proof. So I hired an investigator to follow my wife. I felt stupid when I received the report. Mercy Hospital was being renovated and their parking lot was a construction site with only half the spaces available. So Marcy had to park in the Red Roof Hotel parking lot, as did half the nurses and orderlies. But there was a problem with time. Marcy always showed up for her shift a couple of hours early. It stopped when I returned home. If Marcy was dating someone, there was no way to find out. Lydia could be wrong, or she could be right, but it was enough for me to realize that I was neglecting my wife, and Marcy could leave for another man while I was not around. There's nothing worse than wondering and not being sure. After I've been to Korea, I'll never have to go there again. A year is a long time, long enough to lose your family. I will never get back a year of lost connection with my children in their lives. And finally, the last months of our separation have changed my view that our marriage is unshakable. Who this guy could be, I will never know. We had small children then, and I wanted to save the family. Plus, Marcy seemed determined to solve our problems rather than leave in me to. When the opportunity arose to switch to Army intelligence, I took it. This meant fewer dangerous assignments and, better yet, more time at home. So I deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan 3 times. When war broke out there. But in my new capacity as an Army spy, I was relatively safe behind the lines. This calmed Marcy, but I was worried about how things were going at home. Information about many cases of the failure of military marriages was heard, and I decided it was time to leave. It hurt, but I realized that Marcy and I had almost lost each other and broken our family twice. The chances of our marriage surviving, if I stayed for the general stars, which might not happen, were slim. After I retired, my consulting job made me more money than if I had stayed and become a general. But then it was my daughter's senior year of high school. And I saw her and my son graduate, and I still had my wife. It's priceless. Marcy continued her nursing education, and was now the head nurse on the hospital's surgical team. They specialized in life and death. There was a group of neurosurgeons at the hospital, but 3 stood out. An older doctor who was retiring, a woman in her 40s, and a 40-year-old new talent who had joined them this year, Dr. Trey Cardoza. I met him several times at parties. Tall, dark and handsome. Dr. Trey was the typical narcissistic specialist surgeon. They do get a god complex after they rummage through enough brains and save a few lives. And I could tell he had a thing for Marcy, who kept herself in good shape. Yes, she had the figure of a 30-year-old woman at 47. Which Dr. Trey did not fail to notice. I caught him staring at Marcy when he thought I was away. I could only imagine how he acted towards her at work when I wasn't around. And much to my disappointment, she was talking about what a great surgeon he was and how he would be the next leader of the hospital's surgical team. I was already starting to worry. The only time I brought it up, she was silent for a while before saying anything. I understand how you feel, Rick, but it's my job. I have to work with these doctors, and frankly, they are aggressive towards all of us, nurses. This relieves stress in the operating room. Usually after a very stressful moment. Flirting is a relief mechanism for all of us. Then things get serious again and no one does anything. What about the gap, Marcy? When you go to his office or have lunch, how does my wife openly flirt with another man? You remember how you and that CIA woman were a tight-knit team before you were sent to Iraq? Yes, but we don't. I tried to say, how do I know what you did and what you didn't do? She asked mockingly, making air quotes. I know she was in love with you before you left. I saw it in her face, Rick. If I told her I didn't mind, she would kneel in front of you. Marcy, there was nothing wrong with Deidre. That's what you say, Rick. I should have trusted you with Deidre, so now you have to trust me. 4 months had passed since that conversation, and this question hung in the background of our lives like an ominous cloud. If they did something, they did it at work. I've been in enough hospitals to know that there were plenty of unoccupied rooms and offices for people to use enough privacy. And a red roof hotel with its 2-hour early arrival haunted me from the past, but her words made sense. I either trusted her or I didn't. The fact is that Marcy also had a reason to be suspicious. Deidre could actually offer herself to me in Iraq, and one day after we survived a roadside ambush, she cornered me in an unoccupied office. After not having him for 3 months, I gave in to her advances. She and I were thinking about going all the way when the sirens went off, and the base came under mortar and rocket fire. We took this as an order to be careful and never contacted them again. At first I felt guilty, but then I remembered what Marcy did when I was in Korea, and I told myself that if she can do it, I can do it too. It's meaningless, intimate, that's all. As soon as I get back, everything will be the same, and Marcy and I will be even. I was deceiving myself, and here we are, 2 cheaters married to each other, discussing trust. Still, given how attentive and loving Marcy was, I decided I shouldn't be paranoid about her past. I was almost sure that she was cheating then, but almost. On the other hand, I knew that I myself was not without sin. And now their entire team was heading to South America on a Doctors Without Borders tour. Brain surgeries for poor people in 5 countries take almost 6 weeks. Marcy knew I wasn't crazy about Dr. Trey. But this trip wasn't something she would give up for the sake of her career. And I wasn't going to make waves considering how it supported my military career. I stayed home many times for you. She said many times I didn't know if you were alive or dead. Rick, suppose you were killed or captured like those men and women in Desert Storm. I would have to raise 2 children alone. I've done my part. Now it's your turn to wait for me. Things were a little tense this morning when she left for the airport. She spent a lot of time the previous evening packing her things and talking on the phone with her mother. I found it annoying when it invaded our intimate time that seemed less and less in recent months. Now, wanting to start an argument, I went to bed and woke up the next day to her gone. No message, no goodbye kiss and nothing more. I looked around the house in case she left a note, but I didn't find anything. Just in case. I checked my phone for messages, but there were none to say. I was annoyed and concerned about the way she left would be an understatement. I was furious. After making coffee and calming down, I looked at her flight. She was on the way to Colombia, their first stop. They'll land in a few hours and hopefully she'll text or call from there. Well, I thought another chapter in her marriage. Only she didn't call, didn't write, nothing like that. After double-checking to see if her flight had landed in Bogotá, I wondered if I should contact her. What I sent her was a short message. Hope you were fine. I didn't receive an answer, not the next day, not the day after. Running, as always, helps me focus when stressed, and this time was no different. It took all my self-control to maintain an even pace, but my frustration and anger and my wife's silence made me run faster than usual. By the time I ran the last block, I was out of breath and gasping for air. "Rick, are you okay?" asked a familiar male voice. I looked up and saw Vincent kneeling in the yard. Their house was right behind ours, with our backyard separated by a small fence and gate that we never locked. Immediately behind him, I saw his young wife, who was on her knees fiddling with a flower bed. "Nice, 5th place," I thought as then he turned to look. "Nice view?" he asked with a meaningful smile. I looked away from his wife's 5th place and simply nodded. It was a strange situation, but my mind was too busy to process it all. "Vince," I answered, "I'm tired after a run and I need a shower." "See you another time." "Okay." "Of course," he replied. "Leslie and I will be happy to invite you to our place. We can fry some steaks. Bring a 6-pack of beer or some wine if it makes you feel better." "Okay," I answered. "I will let you know." "You're welcome, Rick," said the young man with a strange knowing smile. "Okay," I said and went to my door. After a shower and a cold drink, I looked around our empty house. The TV was humming while I waited for a call from my wife. It was already dark outside and still no call. No text, no email from Marcy. I had enough and called her at the hotel. After checking the time, I realized that it was about 10 in the evening. They sent me to a room, but there was no answer. "Sorry, Senor," said the manager in good but accented English. "Looks like there is no answer." "Who am I talking to?" "Pablo Espinoza, hotel manager." "At your service, sir," said the manager. "What's your name?" "Rick Weston, Pablo. Mrs. Weston is my wife. I haven't been able to contact her since she left. Can you confirm that she checked into your hotel? Have you seen her?" "Yes, senor. Senora Weston has arrived, along with all the other members of the medical team. I saw her earlier with them in the dining room. They returned from the hospital after surgery. They all look tired. They eat in one upstairs. Can you do me a favor, Pablo?" "Yes, sir." He was no longer so polite, but he tried. "What is it, doctor?" "Kurtosis, rule number 514, senor." "Do you want me to call him?" I winced when I saw that Marcy's number was 515 on the list. "Not now, Pablo." I managed to keep my cool. One more thing. Help me, Pablo, and please call Mrs. Penny Washington's room. Penny, Washington and Marcy were close. In fact, we went to dinner with her and her husband, Josh, last August. After some hesitation, Pablo replied, "Sí, señor. Please wait." And music began to play on the phone. "Hi, Rick," Penny replied. She knew it was me. I had a feeling that Pablo told her who was calling, or did she expect this from me? It looks like that was the case. "Hi, Penny," I said. "Sorry to bother you so late." "Don't worry about it," she said. "Why are you calling me? Is Josh okay?" Ignoring the question, I took a chance. "I'll get to the point. Where is my wife?" And indeed, several seconds passed from a question to her answer. "Why are you asking me this?" She replied, as if irritated by me. But I could tell from her tone that she knew. "Don't fool me, Penny," I replied. "My wife's room is next to Trace, and she's not there. And I think you know why, Rick. I think you need to talk to your wife." She replied, but I could have sworn I heard a man's voice ask, "Who is it?" "Maybe I should talk to your husband about the man in your room. Penny, you know I have Josh's number. I wonder what he would think if you had a man in your room away from home." She didn't say anything but cover the phone. And when she spoke again, it was just her. "Okay, Rick, please don't do this. I beg you, don't call my husband. This is the first time. I don't care how many times you cheated on your husband, Penny. But if you don't tell me about my wife, I'll call your husband and let him know. In a few seconds. Now post it." "Where's my wife?" Phones in this hotel had the ability to transfer to phones of other rooms. Penny didn't want to transfer me, but she was very cooperative, with the threat to her marriage. At least I knew she didn't have time to warn my wife. The phone rang in room 514. "Penny, why are you calling us?" I heard Trey ask, thinking he was talking to Penny. "We? Who the hell were we?" But then I understood the essence of their trip. We were my wife and Trey. Penny had her, we with some guy. It made me wonder how many people on the surgical team were using this trip as an extramarital, intimate excursion. "I don't want to ruin your evening," I said in a cold voice, "but this is Rick Weston, and I want to talk to my wife." It took him a few seconds to come to his senses. He then went into stupid mode. They all did, especially the so-called smart ones. "It's all about arrogance. Why are you asking me?" he asked in a smug tone. "Trey, if you value the surgeon's hands or your eyes, call Marcy. You understand you're threatening past the pink to my wife, you asshole." In the end, I lost my temper. Some noise was heard, similar to a struggle for the telephone. Then I heard my wife's voice. "Give me the phone, Trey." I heard her voice. I would say, "Good evening, Rick," but we both know that's not true at this point. "What are you doing in his room?" I asked, trying not to lose my composure. "Why didn't you call or answer my messages?" And again, "What are you doing in his room, Marcy? Are you having an affair with him?" She was silent for a second or two and then addressed the Trey. "Can you leave for a few minutes?" she told him before he grumbled something obscene. "Thank you, Trey." After that, for several seconds, neither of us said a word. I tried to pull myself together. She spoke first. "Rick, I didn't think we'd have this conversation, or that it would be tonight, but I think we should do it." I was silent, a trick I learned from investigators. Once criminals are caught, they want to confess or build up their defense. "Rick, I was a good wife, mother. To our children and everything I was supposed to be for us. I've done all this for years. Okay, I'll be back home in 6 weeks, and we can talk about where we're going next. But please, just this once, this time away from you. Give it to me, just this once. If you don't mind." "If I don't mind," I repeated, almost in shock. "Nerves. I plan to call you in a couple of days after you and Trey had intimate," I snapped back. "How convenient. After you and Marlon get together," Marcy answered. "Have you already talked to them?" "They invited me to dinner." "For what?" "This is more than dinner, Rick," Marcy said. Leslie wants you. She wants you to rock her world. I talked to her about it, and it's okay if you do. I'm not exactly an angel here, either. Yes, I can see that. Marcy. 24 years of marriage, and this is how you check out. You didn't even have the decency to tell me. Honey, we need to talk in person, Rick. All that could happen is to start an argument before I leave. You think so? I answered sarcastically. But then again, I asked you to stay and not leave. I could stay, Rick, she said, her voice breaking. But I wanted it. I need this at least once in my life before I get old. I need this at least once to feel alive, just one time. To feel like a professional woman on your own. Look, when you were in the army all those years, you were alone and you were judged by your profession. I want the same as for Trey. That's the icing on the cake, Rick. I do not love him, for God's sake. He's just a toy, and I did leave Leslie for you, right? Other wives leave behind casseroles. Did you leave me a woman? She chuckled nervously. What? What can I say? I take care of my husband. What the, Marcy, Rick. She just turned 30. 30, Rick. You're 48. I'm giving you a 6-week hall pass with our 30-year-old roommate, Rick. How many women like Leslie are knocking on our door? So you got me a woman while you deal with Dr. Trey. How thoughtful of you, Marcy. Sorry if I don't, thank you. 6 weeks and we'll be together again. I won't ask you what happened, and neither will you. Do you understand this? I understand everything, I answered. I love you, Rick, I heard her voice. I loved you too, Marcy, but now I'm not sure about that. I hung up, not wanting to prolong our pointless and painful conversation. The bell rang. I went to open the door to see Leslie. Good evening, Rick, she said with a dazzling smile. I noticed that she was alone without her husband. Hi, Leslie, I answered nervously. My eyes looked at her because she looked amazing. Leslie wore minimal makeup, just enough to highlight her face, framed by medium to short-length blonde hair, pink lipstick with matching eyeshadow. A floral print sunrest enveloped her hourglass figure. There's something about heels that makes a woman's legs appear longer, and her calf muscles appear more defined. It was a young and healthy look that attracted me, more than the outfits that some women think turned men on. Are you going to let me in? She grinned, raising an eyebrow. Of course, I said, stepping aside so she could go into the kitchen. I stared at her body for so long that I didn't notice that she had brought a bottle of wine with her. She handed it to me and smiled. Red Moscato. How did she know I liked it? Then a light bulb came on above my head. Marcy, my wife told her what to bring. I was hoping you wanted company. I don't know how good company I'll be, Leslie, but I want to ask you something. Where's Vincent? I asked, refraining from calling him Vinny, as everyone in the area called him. He went out with his friends to play cards. In my mind, I thought about how her husband had left his young wife alone. How many times was Marcy alone? How many times have I left her to her fate alone, to give in to temptation? So Marcy went to South America, she said as I poured her a glass. Have you heard anything about her? Funny you should ask. I was just talking to Marcy when you knocked. Oh, sorry, Rick, did I interrupt? No, not at all. We said almost everything that needed to be said. She probably sensed my terrible mood. Rick, I think we need to talk. Let's sit down, I said, pointing to the living room. What did she tell you? That should have been my question. Why don't you start? I was hoping Marcy would talk to you before she left. Really? No. I had to play telephone games with her, only to find out that my wife is hiding out with her doctor boyfriend in South America. Then she told me to talk to you. So let's stop playing this game and tell me what you and her planned before she left. Leslie nodded, then took a long sip from her glass. Some time ago, we met her in a shopping center. We kind of hit it off and had a drink in her backyard, one day. I don't know where you and Vincent were that day, but you know what, girls and booze. Soon I was chatting about my marriage and my husband's weird quirks. She paused, as if trying to decide what to say next, but I just looked back without saying anything. And of course, she continued. You see, Rick, my husband, loves to share with me. I share with you. I asked, a little confused before I realized what she meant. Oh, you mean with other men? She finished my sentence. Exactly. Interesting, I managed to blurt out. And as far as I understand, you told Marcy about this. I was tipsy. And, Rick, can I be honest? Certainly. I find you attractive, don't get me wrong, but I like older men. I'm flattered that I fit your type, but why tell my wife about this? Because I wanted her to know. And let me shoot you, well, how did my wife cope with this? I was surprised that she just listened and didn't say anything. Leslie continued. Nothing at first. Of course, she was a little shocked at first. I think she asked me to explain how this was happening between me and Vince. I explained, and she seemed to be thinking about something because her gaze clouded over. Well, Marcy never discussed this with me, I said, so Marcy never talked to you about this? You know, about you and me? Actually. She dropped a bomb on me over the phone right when you arrived tonight. She seemed surprised by the phone. Wow, I took a sip, too, and nodded. Rick, you said you found out about her and her doctor friend this evening. I wouldn't call a man a gentleman who sleeps with another man's wife. I agree, she said my husband shares with me. But I never act behind his back. So Vincent knows you're here? Certainly, my husband knew I liked you ever since you moved into our neighborhood. I haven't had a regular lover for a long time, and I was looking for him. Do you have regular boyfriends on the side? I only had one of these before. This went on for 2 years. But mostly we go out of town and meet men. Vincent finds them online and we meet them for dinner or drinks. If I like them, we go to our room. What does Vincent do while you're with this guy? Well, Vince finds men on the internet who are willing to let him into the room. He likes to watch, but it's also safer. I think so, I replied, shaking my head. How long have you two been doing this? About 4 years, she answered casually, as if we were discussing gardening. So what about Marcy? Oh, yes, Marcy, she answered with a smile. Crossing her legs, she leaned over. A couple of weeks ago, she came over and said she agreed, but I would have to do it with you. When she left the country with her surgical group. Did she tell you anything about what or who she would be doing while she was gone? No, but we are women. I had the feeling that she was compromising her conscience. What exactly? Well, she probably knew what she would do, there. Allowing me to have access to you may have been something, that eased your conscience. Leslie shook her head. Honestly, I wish she had talked to you beforehand. I don't like this cheating, sneaking. I didn't answer anything to this. Even Leslie thought so. I have something for you, Leslie said, the letter that Marcy left for me to give to you. Reaching into her purse, she pulled it out and handed it to me. Come on, read it. I'll go to the ladies' room. She made a gesture in facial expression, as if asking which way. Further down the corridor to the right. Thank you. I'll be back soon, Leslie said, smiling and emptying her glass. The envelope was simple. There was only one word on it. You. Taking a deep breath. I opened it and began to read. Dear Rick, I'm a coward, and by the time you read this, you'll know that I'm breaking my vows with Trey. But before you pass judgment on me, think about you and Dearie in Iraq. I have no proof, but I'm pretty sure you and her head into me in Iraq. You're a terrible liar, Rick, but then I'm no better. The first time Trey touched me, I didn't tell you. Maybe I should have done this, and perhaps I should have had an affair or affairs. During all those years, I was home alone and lonely, while you were playing soldier. God knows I've already suffered enough. Our kids needed 2 parents, Rick. I tried to be both mom and dad, but I'm not you. Only you were. You and I needed my husband's touch, damn it. But I resisted being pestered and remained faithful to you. God knows it wasn't easy. Then you went to Iraq, and your dear Deidre Klein returned home before you. That came to see me and smugly said she took care of you there, then left, before I could ask what she meant. But when you came back, I knew exactly what she meant. Any doubts they had were cleared away when you turned away in shame, Rick. I know 2 wrongs don't make a right, Rick. I also know that there's a possibility that you didn't do anything to her. In that case, I'm the first cheater here with Trey. But I do not think so. I think you were the first to do it. Maybe you've done this before or not. It may or may not have been the first time, but I'm tired of being an obedient wife, waiting at home and chasing after my war hero. When Leslie told me she was in love with you, I talked to both her and Vincent about it. He admitted that he allows her to have men. They have an open marriage. It looks like it won't be on my conscience to break up their marriage. Only that I cheated on you. So this is the essence of the situation we find ourselves in. I am going on this trip and during my absence. I am not your wife and you are not my husband. You have a 6-week gym pass and I'm giving myself that too. As far as I understand, if you and I love each other, we will forget about it when I see you upon my return. If we don't do this, I will be hurt. And I will mourn what you and I had and what we lost. No, that trade didn't seduce me or force me into it. I do this by my own choice and free will. I don't like him, but I find him attractive when I return. All that will remain is a memory. If I am with you, what am I going to do with him after you divorce me? Well, it won't matter then, will it? Know this, Rick Weston, you are and remain the love of my life, even after you broke my heart. I love you. It was my great honor to be your wife and mother to your children, but after all these years, I need a break from us. Leslie is more than willing to have a night with you until I get back. Vincent would pay you to let him watch, but it's your choice and the decision you have to make. I know she won't leave Vincent for you. He allows her to get many men this way. I doubt she wants to give it up. I'll leave you with one thought, Rick. If you love someone, set them free and may return to you. I'll be back in 6 weeks. I love you always and forever, Marcy. P.S. Leslie should have been tested for STDs before she came to see you for the first time. Make sure she shows it. Trey and I were both screened before we left. I will get tested for you before I return, and will not touch him or anyone else until you and I meet. Then I'll show you my STD test. Please do this a week before I return and also abstain. This will be our first sign of trust. I booked a room for us at the Ambassador Hotel near the airport. If you want to meet me, be there 2 hours after my flight is due to return. I plan to go there alone after my arrival. Please don't come to the airport when my flight lands. Please don't make a scene, either take me back or leave. I plan to meet you at the hotel. I'll be waiting in the lobby. After finishing reading, I noticed Leslie pouring herself another glass. Are you okay? She asked. I will, I answered. She nodded and returned with a bottle and a filled glass, this time, sitting next to me. She refilled my glass and turned to look at me with her deep eyes. So, Rick, what do we do? I looked at her and said, thank you for delivering the letter to Marcy. I hate what she wrote, but I really appreciate you giving me that letter. As for what we do nothing. I appreciate your offer, but I'm not like that. I won't deny that I'm attracted to you, but I won't be one of your lovers. I spent a lot of time in the army and overseas, but I was faithful to my wife with one very unfortunate mistake. I will not give Marcy free rein in what she has done and continues to do. With that, I stood up, took my glass of wine, and walked into the kitchen, pouring the wine into the sink. Leslie just looked at me, not moving. Honestly, I don't think she expected this answer. I think she was so used to having men at her beck and call, especially when she was proposing into him, that she was stunned and confused by my answer. When she continued to just sit there, I took the bottle of wine, inserted the cork and handed it to her. Leslie, thank you again for delivering the letter to Marcy and for your offer. She finally understood what I was saying and what my actions meant. She stood up and walked towards me, trying her best to be seductive. But I had no desire to continue this conversation with her. She started to speak, but I cut her off before she could say a word. I am devastated by Marcy's actions. I'm asking you to leave so I can understand what this means to me. With that, I let her out the door and handed her the remaining bottle of wine she had bought. Once outside the door, she turned and started talking again. But I slowly closed the door. To be honest, I wasn't trying to be rude, but I had no time for her. Having spent almost 30 years in the military, especially the last few years in intelligence, I had a lot of contacts and resources at my disposal. I also realized the mistakes I made with Marcy. First of all, I should have had a serious discussion with her about her actions while I was in Korea. Although she claimed to be faithful to me, I never discussed with her the issue of her showing up 2 hours early for her shift. I had to clear things up. Not knowing, of course, affected me more than I expected. Second, I had to be honest about my failure in Iraq. I guess I was too ashamed of what I did, and I just couldn't be honest with her about it. I should have confessed to her as soon as I got back. Plus, now I found out that Deidre already said something to Marcy, giving her a reason to start an affair with Trey. Marcy asked me this outright 4 months ago, and I continued to lie as she wrote in her letter. Marcy was sure that I had lied to her about it. Third, I knew something was going on between her and Trey, but I didn't force the issue. This was mainly due to her asking me about dear Deidre and the shame I felt about my actions. She was able to silence me by exploiting my inability to be honest with her. I took her letter and reread it. My first impression was that it was self-serving and full of her excuses for cheating. Reading it again didn't change my perception, but it did make me realize that the woman I loved, the woman I raised their children with, and the woman I thought I would grow old with was gone. She was replaced by someone I didn't like and someone I was no longer in love with. I loved her because of my children, so I didn't want her to get hurt, but deep down, I knew it was over between us. I will never forgive her and I will never trust her again. I also realized that the woman who wrote this letter was delusional after 24 years. Didn't she know me? How could she think that I could accept her actions? What struck me most, however, was her sense of self-worth. She truly believed that she deserved what she did. Her statement was complete crap. How can she claim that I am the love of her life and then write, "But I am tired of being an obedient wife, waiting at home and chasing after my war hero"? What a contradiction. While her entire letter infuriated me, one statement really angered me. Playing soldier, what the hell? Marcy knew who I was and what I did when we got married. It was no secret. It was a hard life, but we got through it together. Does she think I enjoy being away from my family? Did she think I like being in the field, in training, or actually being in combat? How about turning down the opportunity to become a general, because I understood the pressure it would put on her marriage? How could she have thought that continuing this charade would be something we could survive? To hell with it all. Plus, she apparently avoided the possibility of having a night before the trip to say goodbye. I think she wanted to be fresh for doctor training. Her quiet and unnoticed departure to the airport, and then a complete silence until I forced her, and I realized that this woman did not really love me as she claimed. She was so obsessed with her desire, her vacation, from us, that she didn't care about me or my feelings. Moreover, she did not respect me. I thought what we had was priceless. I see now she wants to take a break from us, and she will have such a vacation for the rest of her life. It's time to take action and move forward, without her again. I have a ton of contacts, so it's time to put them to good use. The next morning I went for a run, had a good workout, had a good breakfast, and then called my office saying I was taking a few days off. Having witnessed several marriages fail while in the military, I had a good idea of what to expect, and what I needed to do to end this dying marriage. My next step was to contact an old Army buddy, Jackson Steele, who had served in the Jaguar Corps but had retired to go into private practice. I told him what happened, what was currently happening, and what I wanted. He introduced me to a woman who he called the best divorce lawyer he knew. I called her office and made an appointment for the next day. I told her secretary what the meeting was for, and she emailed me a list of documents she wanted me to bring to the meeting. I went online and paid off our joint credit cards and then canceled them. Marcy had a card in her name, so I knew I wouldn't inconvenience her. I then went to the bank and withdrew half the money from our savings and checking accounts, removing my name from them. I also removed all documents and items from her safe. Then I went to another bank and opened accounts in my name only. In addition, I got my own safe. After I left my new bank, I went to the HR department at my employer's office. I was a consultant, but I worked for a private company that had extensive contacts and contracts with the federal government. There, I changed my beneficiaries of my life insurance policy in 401k to children. I wanted to make sure that if something happened to me before the divorce was final, Marcy still wouldn't win. My next step was to call Jackson back. I told him to change my will, to leave everything to the children. I have also appointed him as the executor of my estate. I was surprised that I was able to complete everything in one day. However, instead of resting, I went home and started packing. I was surprised at how many things no longer had any value to me. I think this was because many of the memories associated with these items were tainted by Marcy's actions. I left them for her. If she doesn't need them, she can get rid of them. The next day, I met with Lisa Davis, the lawyer Jackson had recommended. She was a nice woman, and I was happy to have her as my lawyer. I had a feeling that she could be ruthless if necessary. I handed her all the documents I was asked to bring, as well as a copy of Marcy's letter. She went through everything, checked them out, put together a worksheet, and asked me questions about what I wanted to do with our shared property. I told her I wanted to sell the house and split the equity. If Marcy wanted, she could buy my share. I also wanted our joint investment account to be separate. In short, I did my best to be as fair as possible. I hated what Marcy did to us, but I didn't hate her. Lisa also asked me if I wanted to take any action against the hospital or Trey. I told her that I was not interested in taking any legal action against anyone. Over the next few weeks, I rented an apartment, and finished packing everything I wanted to take from the house. In the end, there really wasn't much. I did not take any furniture, dishes or anything with me, other than my personal clothing and mementos from my army career. Lisa hired a company to document everything in the house, and estimate its value. Again, I wanted a fair settlement. I also talked to my boss about taking a more out-of-town and overseas assignments with my daughter in the Navy and my son in college. There was nothing keeping me here anymore for weeks before Marcy's return. I prepared everything. The divorce papers just needed to be presented to her so that she could sign them. Everything I wanted was packed, put in the garage and ready to move into my new apartment. I furnished it with furniture, provided it with food and all necessary utensils, and I took with me most of my clothes. I doubt my neighbors had any idea what was going on. I continued to do all my normal activities to keep everything looking normal. I didn't need to tell anyone about my plans until I decided it was time. I actually saw Vince and Leslie a few times. I was polite, but made it a rule to communicate with them very briefly. At one point, Vince came up to talk to me, but I pulled away, telling him that I was already leaving and I didn't have time to talk. Later that evening, Leslie called me, but I let it go to voicemail and deleted it without listening. Nothing they could say was important. The next week, I received a call out of the blue. I realized it was Marcy calling because it was an overseas phone number. We both had international plans on our cell phones, so I was surprised that she didn't call or text me on it. She left me a short message asking me to call her. She said cell coverage was bad, but she needed to talk to me. She didn't say what she needed or what the call was about, only that she needed to talk to me. I didn't call her back. I had nothing to say to her, and she had nothing to say that I wanted to hear. 3 days later, I received another call. This time, she said that she was very worried about me and that she needed to talk to me. I didn't really understand what was going on, but I ignored it and didn't call back. She wanted a break from us and I gave it to her. Later that evening, Vince and Leslie came over. In this case, I didn't bother to open the door. The next day, I waited until I figured out that most of the neighbors had gone to work and asked a small moving company to come to the house to pick up the boxes I had placed in the garage. It took me and 2 guys about 20 minutes to move everything from the garage to their truck. The rest of my toiletries and clothes were in my car. I moved out of the house. For the next week, I was out of town for work. I think my absence from the house was noticed. Leslie called me, but I just told her I was out of town. I let her know that I didn't have time to talk, so we didn't discuss anything else. All this time, I maintained contact with my children, parents and relatives. They checked on me, knowing Marcy was out of the country, and just made sure I was okay. I made sure everyone knew I was okay. I received another call from Marcy, but I ignored it. I didn't even bother to listen to the voicemail she left. I realized that a lot of what I've written makes it seem like I was handling this in a very clinical manner, but I'm truly devastated by Marcy's actions. To tell the truth, I was completely crushed by her attitude. The shock and anger I felt after her phone conversation, when I learned about her affair, and then read the letter, and reflected on her behavior, turned into deep sadness. I realized that she had changed a lot. Moreover, her cavalier attitude toward me and my feelings proved to me that she believed she deserved what she did, regardless of how it affected anyone else. While working in intelligence, I worked closely with special operators. I provided the information they used and needed to do their job. I had contacts and made friends with some very serious and intimidating men. These people did everything they could to complete the mission. In short, they were as deadly as any human being on Earth. Due to the nature of my work, I continued to maintain semi-regular contact with several special operators, a couple of whom were from a specific team. My unnamed friend gave me a number to call if I ever needed his help. A week before Marcy was due to return, I called on my cell phone. I dialed the number and hung up without leaving a message. A few minutes later, they called me back. I spoke briefly with this person and hung up. Later that day, I met this man in a small biker bar about 50 meters from my hometown. I gave him Marcy's name, photo ID, address. I told him what I wanted to do in parting. I told him it's a hospital, not a morgue. The day Marcy returned, I sent out an email to my entire family and a select number of friends in it. I confessed to my only failure in Iraq and took responsibility for my failures. I have also included a copy of Marcy's letter. I wasn't going to go scorched earth, but I let everyone know that I filed for divorce and the reasons for it. Before I sent the letter out to everyone, I sent it to my kids first. Then I called them and explained everything that was happening. I didn't want to blindside them, but I felt they deserved to know the whole story. They were both heartbroken over the divorce and Marcy's actions. Rhonda was especially angry with her mother. "I can't believe Mom turned into such a person," my daughter screamed into the phone. Then she quickly added, "What the hell is she thinking? She was a role model for me and now she's showing her worst side." I started to answer her, but realized that she was simply running out of steam and ignored it. Instead, I told them both, "I love you. And I understand how this affects both of you, but we will get through this. Honestly, I don't understand what your mother is doing, but there's nothing more I can say or do. I don't trust her anymore and I won't accept what she did. She has shown herself to be an incredibly selfish person who doesn't really care what others think or feel because of her attitude and actions. I am leaving her to live the life she chose. Kyle, what do you think? I think Mom has gone crazy. I can't think of any other reason why she would do this." We really had nothing more to say, so we said goodbye and hung up. My next calls were to my parents and relatives. But both sets of parents couldn't believe it, especially Marcy's parents. I could only point to Marcy's letter as evidence of her attitude and actions. Of course, both sets of parents wondered if I could go through with it and get through counseling. I told them that wouldn't happen. I felt sorry for Marcy's parents. They were good people, and I could tell they were deeply hurt by her actions. I made those calls from the airport and shortly after that last call, I boarded a plane and left for an overseas assignment. I had to leave the country for the next 2 months. Marcy will not see me at the hotel tomorrow or any other day. And she had hoped the next day. The surgical team returned to the airport. I don't think they expected the reception they received. Josh was there to meet Penny and immediately attacked her, demanding to know who she slept with. Damn it, I called him and told him everything. He had the right to know who he was married to. Several other members of the club, both husbands and wives, suffered similar treatment. Josh made it a point to call and tell everyone what he knew, and did everything he could to find out who Penny was sleeping with. Judging by the live feed that was given to me at my request, it was a pretty shitty show. Dr. Trey did his best to avoid all of this, but it seems his girlfriend didn't like Marcy sleeping with him during their trip. She hit them both and had to be physically restrained from doing anything else. In addition, several hospital staff and several representatives of Doctors Without Borders were there to find out what happened during the trip. Josh, of course, did everything he could to damage the reputation of the hospital and their organization. His threatened lawsuits have certainly attracted attention. It took about 10 minutes for everything to calm down. This was largely due to the arrival of the police and the separation of many of the greeters from the returning team. Hospital administrators pulled the team aside and told them to be at the hospital in the morning for a full briefing. They were told that their further work depended on the result. Around this time, a man, dressed as a limousine driver, approached Marcy and asked, "Are you Marcy Weston?" She had a confused look on her face and answered with a simple yes. Handed her a large manila envelope and said, "You have been served. Besides, Colonel Weston had a message for you. You are free," with these words. The man left a very shocked and surprised Marcy. I turned off the live stream I was watching and moved on with my life. However, this is not the end of this little story. Later that evening, Dr. Trey returned home, tired and more than a little angry about the events at the airport. He didn't like it when his affair with a member of the surgical team was put on public display. His evening was about to get worse. Much, much worse. Dr. Trey was the victim of a home invasion robbery. The last thing he remembered was being shocked when he crossed the threshold of his house. He woke up a few days later in the hospital. His nose was broken. His left orbital bone was broken. He lost several teeth in the fingers on his left hand were broken, with his index finger and thumb crushed. His right elbow and right hand were broken, and all the fingers and thumb on his right hand were crushed. Dr. Trey's house was trashed and a message was spray painted on a blank wall. "Don't mess with married women." Would you agree to this type of relationship, and would you have the same reaction as your husband? Write your answer in the comments. See you in the next video.